Hey, Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. So let's start off with what's your company do?
So my company is Raika Technologies, and we are an incubator based out of Denver, Colorado. And basically, we help build startups. I am a startup ninja slash junkie.
Mhm.
I'm trying to kick the habit. Have not done so in the last 2.5 decades. Still going strong. And my whole goal in life is to help people who have ideas that are in the technology space avoid wasting a bunch of time and money on ideas that will never be viable. So we do a lot of what is the problem that you're solving? Who are you solving it for? Does your solution resonate for those people? Trying to get to failure as quickly and as cheaply as we can to find the pivots that put people into the space where they have the most available market and they're able to get the most ROI and they're able to make that go forward decision to spend their precious time and money building software and building a business around software without any regret.
Got it. So in the case of somebody like me, who if I didn't have a technology co-founder or technical co-founder, but I
Yep.
had this idea, I would be one of your ideal customers, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So a lot of the people that we work with are small business owners in a non-tech space, and they're looking at a technology solution to either bring in a new revenue stream or bring in a new type of client, or maybe they're even solving a problem in their industry so they can start selling to their competitors, and through their competitors, those clients as well. But we do work with people who have never done business at all, sometimes too, and they will have technology ideas and they're like, I don't know, do I go hire a software developer, which is what a lot of people do. They're like, oh, I have this idea. Let me go find somebody to build it for me. And we
Mhm.
say there's a big gap between I have an idea and I'm ready for a software developer. And that's the gap that we help people fill
Got it. Okay. And save them a lot of money in the
and
process.
save them a lot of money in the process. Yeah, it's my personal mission in life to fully eliminate the story of the guy who spent $250,000 on software and 5 years of his life with nothing to show for it. I
Yeah.
actually heard, I sat at lunch about 9 months ago with a guy who told me a very similar story. And he said, not to mention, because I mortgaged a house to get the money to start the business, my wife ended up leaving me. And then I lost half my retirement and I ended up losing the house anyway. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like hurts my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, and you get people that are so sold on their ideas without any validation whatsoever that that happens, and it's
Exactly
tragic.
right. If one of the tips is if you hear yourself starting to say out loud, this will sell itself, you need me.
Yeah, or there's no competitors, so I have a
That's
blue ocean.
right.
Yeah,
That's
there's no
right.
competitors for a reason there, muchacho.
That's right. That's right.
So when did you start this company?
So this company in its current form has been around for about 3 years. I've
Right.
been building startups for almost 25. I started my first company at 15. Sold that about 4 years later. I was building websites for small businesses, and this was in the mid 90s. And so basically my sales pitch was, hey, you're in the phone book, right? And they're like, well, yeah, of course, everybody's in the phone book. I'm like, this is the phone book of the future. If you don't have a website, you're going to be behind. And that was how I sold websites, right?
Long
um,
sales pitch. I like it.
it was the shortest sales pitch ever because immediately you would see people's brains be like, wait, there's a thing I'm not doing.
Hmm.
And so I sold that company to a major competitor of mine. I won a really big contract with a very coveted client. And so one of my major competitors came in and said, hey, we'll buy all of your companies and all of your clients and all of your contracts if you'll transition that relationship to us. So I had my first exit at 19. A couple of years later, I started another company
Hmm.
doing early key encryption technology. So, helping companies that had traditionally boxed software models transition into first online updates and then into online distribution and downloads and things like that. And had it, this was in the days when DSL was getting faster, but a lot of people were still
Hmm.
on dial-up.
Hmm.
So some people had faster speeds and some didn't. And if something got cut off in the middle of a transmission, how did you pick that back up without having to start over? And so that company was acquired by another company that did some stuff around that area, but our technology was better than theirs. So they bought us for our technology and kind of merged that and created a larger company out of it. And then about 6 years ago, I started my third company, which is still in operation today. It's unfortunate that COVID happened because it's totally killed the travel and transportation industry. And we build software for pilots and crew members to bid their schedules to fly. Which, when you reduce flying by 70+%,
Yeah.
there's 70+% fewer pilots, which means my revenue goes down by 70+%.
Yep.
So we're, just like everybody else, we're figuring out, are there pivots to make? Is there a way to weather this? Eventually it will come back, but does it come back different? Are airlines operated differently? Who knows? So that one we're positioning to sell it. The
For
sale will
70%
probably,
off.
yeah, exactly. We're kind of like, okay, maybe we need to back that goal up a little bit and figure out how we make it a little bit more recession proof than it is right now. So then, like I said, about 3 years ago, I started this business.
What made you pick this business? Why did you pick? I mean, there's a lot. You've obviously got extensive experience in a variety of industries. You had to come up with an idea. So this is
Yep.
something I want to drill into a bit, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they get stuck with analysis paralysis, too many ideas, too many shiny objects, and then they don't do enough research, which is why they lose $250,000, their wife, their house, and everything.
That's exactly
So
right.
what made you think about doing this? And then how did you validate it before you put too much resources into it?
Yeah. So how do you pick the thing? I generally tend to go with, and I encourage all my entrepreneurs to go with the thing that gets you most excited, that feels like it's you. There are lots of businesses that people have come up with, and they've been like, "Hey, well, you should build this thing," and I'm like, "Yeah, that doesn't feel like me. That
Yeah, but
doesn't
okay. So
fit."
I love RC cars, which I don't, but I'm just using an example. I love RC cars, but like you can't make any money at it. So
I don't know. I don't know enough about RC cars. If I did, I probably could dig in with you and find a way to monetize something that RC cars lover. But see, then that comes back to, what do you love? Like, what's your passion? And where is the largest market for your passion? That's why there are a lot of ideas where you go, yeah, there's not enough RC cars lovers for this ever to be profitable. Like, I'm going to put way more into it. So unless I'm willing for it to be a hobby, I'm not going to go down that path. But
yeah,
we're
like
not
if you type
all,
your keyword into Google and there's no ads showing up, keep on
you
moving,
don't
man.
go. Yeah, don't
Go.
do that. But remember, we're not one-sided, right? Even the most like RC car enthusiast, there's probably other things that person's into in their life, right? So it's something that, when things get hard, or when you're like, okay, I gotta power through today, because those days always come as an entrepreneur. I don't care what you're doing, don't care how much it excites you. There's always comes that point where you're like, am I really doing this again today? And it's like, yep, I'm keeping my eye on the prize, and that is enough to keep me going. And there's a big enough market that there can potentially be an ROI there. I'm not a fan of going after businesses for my health.
Yeah.
Like it's
To use me as an example, I'm not particularly fascinated with SOPs, even though I'm known as the SOP guy. I'm
Mhm.
fascinated with the ability to delegate and build a team and give myself freedom in my life.
That's
So
exactly right.
if SOPs is the vehicle to give me that life, okay,
Yep.
tick the box on passion. And how many other people need SOPs? All of them.
All of
So the
them.
market is huge.
That's exactly right. So see, it's not even that you have a passion for automating minutia and rote tasks, right? That's not a passion. Your passion lies outside of that, and what gets in the way of you being able to do the things that you love is the minutia and the rote tasks. And if you could delegate that or automate it in some way,
No, it's just
then that
work
would
in
free up
general.
your time.
It's
Yeah,
just work in
exactly.
general that gets in the way of my wanting to ride my dirt bike, ride my mountain bike, spend more time outdoors. It's just work. So if I can figure out how to automate all of work, which I'm on a mission to do,
And
um,
your product, your SaaS product, totally does that.
there you go.
So hashtag you are winning.
Yes. Yes. We're making progress. All right.
That's right.
So, for entrepreneurs who are thinking about creating their own software company, walk me through in as much detail as you can the process that will allow them to not blow 6 months and 300 grand,
Yeah.
because we just don't want that outcome to happen.
Yeah. Totally don't want that. So it all starts with being able to answer these three questions as succinctly as you possibly can and feel extremely confident in the level of your knowledge and insight into the answers. The first is, what is the problem I'm solving? If it takes a medical degree or a finance degree or an advanced aerospace engineering degree for the average person who's going to use your product to understand it, you don't have it yet. So what's the problem you're really solving? And you should be able to state it in a sentence or two max.
Mm-hmm.
The second question is, who are you solving it for? Okay. Who is your ideal client, your ideal customer? What is that user persona? And how do they experience the problem? Understanding your target audience, understanding the market, understanding who you're speaking to will, actually, it's funny. I just did a startup therapy couch post on this the other day. You have to narrow your focus in order to sell really well. And so if you're starting out saying, I'm building this for all entrepreneurs everywhere, how do people identify themselves in that bucket? People are like, well, I am an entrepreneur, but I'm an entrepreneur who has these couple qualities that are really important to me. So do you really understand me, or do you just understand general entrepreneurship? Whereas if you say, we work with entrepreneurs who own a small business and are looking to build a tech solution, an app, a website, or a software solution for these purposes, like what I described to you earlier. Well, now people can identify themselves. When they hear me say what it is that I do, they're like, oh, I'm a small business owner and I need to build some technology, and that's not my background. So you're exactly who I need to talk to. It seems like you've taken the whole world of entrepreneurs and narrowed it into this little tiny bucket. But
So
when you
how's
do
this?
that, you get way more sales, way more people.
We make it easier for the founder of SaaS companies that have recently been funded to delegate work to employees and virtual assistants.
Perfect. Any person reading that or hearing you talk about that will absolutely know if they are the person that needs to be working with you. And when somebody self-identifies that they want or need what you have, it's not a sales conversation anymore. It's okay, what do you need? And let's dig in and let's talk about it and let's figure out what's right for you. They've already convinced themselves that they need you because they heard themselves in how you spoke. So the first question was, what problem are you solving? The second question is, who are you solving it for? The third question you then have to answer, once you can narrow down that niche, how many are there?
Mm-hmm.
Are there 10 of those?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no business there. Are there 500,000 of those, depending on your pricing model and how difficult it is to win that business? Maybe there's enough. Are there 10 million of those? Now we're talking. So it's figuring out a niche that you can talk to and that's in your wheelhouse, but also making sure that your niche has enough people to make it worth the time and money you will spend to get to market. And here's another sort of cut at that. I was recently talking to a group that is designing a hotel concept around the sports industry, traveling sports teams. Not pro teams. They're focusing on like college teams and club teams and stuff like that.
Market.
Yeah. But here's the thing. They want to capture 10% of that market. Marriott owns 92% of the hotel market. So in order to capture 10% of the market, you have to get 2% away from Marriott and everybody else in the industry. Not going to happen.
Mm-mm.
So if it takes 10% in that model for you to be profitable, this ain't a good idea.
Yeah.
So it's looking at, it's kind of taking your grand vision and getting real about it. And that's really what it takes. And those three questions are where I start with everyone. Because when we can answer those three questions and we feel good about the answers and we can see that there's a real market and a real problem and real people at the end of that thing, then the rest becomes about figuring out, what should be in your MVP. MVP should be for user one on day one has to get value. Otherwise your MVP is not actually viable.
Yep.
So if you're looking at a product that all it is about is big data and it requires like huge social media networks, you better be willing to spend a few $1 million at least going in and buying that data in order to have that value day one. So maybe that needs to come out of your MVP, and you need to figure out what are you doing on a personal level that drives people to use the product to generate all of that interactive data or whatever it is, so that then you can report on it in phase 2 or phase 3 or 5 years down the road when you have enough of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to figure out what's the problem you're solving and who you're solving it for. And then you can dig into the details of what is really a minimum viable product look like? What is it really going to take? Who are the people I need on my team, right? Like, do I need a technical co-founder, or can I raise some capital and hire a really good software development firm that works with entrepreneurs and understands the sort of constraints of that? And can I get the job done that way for a while? You know, there's lots of different ways to make this thing work. And a lot of what I do with my clients and with the entrepreneurs I work with is figuring out what's the right answer for them, because there's no formula. I wish that there was. Just to figuring out whether or not you have a market and whether or not your idea has a real ROI potential. There's a formula to that. But figuring out what the next right steps are, there's not really a formula. There's a lot of things to consider. And at some point you got to be willing to be like, I'm doing a gut check. This feels right. And I'm willing to stand by the decision to go forward. So
you left off on number 3, and I think you said there was 6, right?
Yeah, there is 6.
Gotta keep you on track here.
Okay. Yeah. So, what's the problem and who are we solving it for? I've skipped over, 1, getting to MVP. I guess we did talk about user personas. That's number 2. Then there's blue sky, which comes after user personas, but before MVP. So blue sky is if you don't get out of your head all that stuff that's rolling around in there, you will always be distracted. It's like trying to aim at your MVP and there's squirrels and shiny stuff passing you by on every side because you have never gotten it all out and you're worried that it's going to get lost. That's how our brains work. Blue sky is literally, I do it with sticky notes because I'm a very tactile learner. I write out sticky notes of every possible thing I could ever want to see this thing do. If you could wave a magic wand today and your software would be perfect in your mind, what's all the stuff that it does? And every one of those goes onto a sticky note and gets stuck in a bucket or, on a whiteboard somewhere in groups or whatever. Because then it's out of your brain and you can do that slash and burn like we were talking about. What really creates value? User 1, day 1, and come up with your MVP. Okay, so what's the problem? User personas, blue sky, then MVP. Then you need to talk to people. Because once you have an idea what your MVP needs to look like, you should build a prototype of it. This is not something that's connected to a server typically. This isn't something that somebody could say, oh, where can I buy this? Like,
it could be just wireframes, could it not?
That's exactly right. Balsamiq is a tool that I use all the time for this process, which is customer and product validation. Talking to a body of real people who are your real end users who have the real problem that you're trying to solve, because we need to decide whether or not this solution resonates with them. If you've missed the mark somehow, they're going to tell you, or it may be that you thought the problem was the way you originally defined it, and in 90% of the cases, they're telling you, well, actually, this over here is a much bigger problem, and I'd pay a lot of money to solve that. So it could be you have the right target audience and you're in the right vein, but you need a 2-degree pivot, in one direction, and all of a sudden, now you're really hitting the mark every time, right? So customer and product validation, and then the last step is to look at all of that body of data and come up with what is the right pricing model, what does your pro forma look like, what is your go-to-market strategy, does that fit in, does that strategy fit in with what your MVP is, and then being able to say, all right, I'm ready, let's pull the trigger and get this thing built and execute on the plan. So the 6 pieces are building the plan to get you to a place where you can confidently say, yes, I'm going forward, I believe in this plan, and all I have to do now is execute on it. So, and I'm putting all I have to do now in quotes.
So let me give you a hack for a good chunk of that I discovered a long time ago when I was trying to start my very first company, and I really had no idea what I was doing. I went to a trade show. So you talked about passion. I love fast cars. I like the internet.
Too.
So I went to the SEMA Show in 2000, I think.
Okay. Okay.
And I walked around with a simple question for all these manufacturers. What are you doing to integrate the internet into your business? Because at the beginning, I didn't know how to ask a smarter question than that.
That's right.
And as I spoke to each brand on this massive trade show floor, I would get little pieces of information, feedback. And I slowly got it figured out that at that point in time, because of the lack of technology, that manufacturers they'd make too many of these widgets and not enough of these widgets, and that would cost them profits.
Right.
So what I figured out in talking to this one company, which was way towards the end of my visit to the show, was that if they could figure out how to not make too many of these widgets and make more of those widgets, they could save about $10 million a year. Now, here's where I was dumb. Where I was dumb was I said, okay, sounds good. Let me go see if I can raise some money and then I'll come back to you. Stupid.
Right.
What I should have said was, great. If you fund the prototype of this, we will build it with a heavy skew to solving your problem. We're going to sell it to other people, but I'll give you some equity as an exchange for that.
That's
When
exactly
they say
right.
yes, instant
Winning.
validation.
That's
and
right.
you've raised your money and you've got your beta customer.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So a lot of B2B solutions can be done that way. Where if you have I have a client right now, if we get 2 or 3 small regional banks to sign on the dotted line, that's all the money we need. And actually 1 or 2 of those banks really wants to partner with us and wants to put in some capital. So you're absolutely right. There are strategies like that. Typically the customer validation and the product validation piece, the interviewing, that's more about end consumer stuff. And it's ironic because it takes a lot more work when you do it that way because you have to talk to more people to get the data. But you also get pretty good data. So I love your hack. Totally. Pre-selling. That's exactly, I think that we talked about that last time we talked is I am a huge fan of bootstrapping and I'm a huge fan of pre-selling. When I first started out in software, we used to call that vaporware and it came with sort of like a sneer and a, back of the throat, whatever, and now I'm like, man, technology moves fast.
Oh yeah.
I can build it faster if I know that I have somebody sitting out there ready for it.
Yeah. If you've got detailed enough wireframes and you have either the track record of making software before, or you've partnered with a firm that has the track record of making software before.
You got it.
There is not a reason in the world why you shouldn't be able to get a check.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You won't get it from the first company you talk to, but that's why you go to a trade show.
Although I wish.
Have trade shows these days.
I know, especially with all this. Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
That'll happen again.
It will.
Year, 2 or 3. Hopefully
it
not
will.
that many. All right. So in terms of developing the tech specs of the MVP, I know you talked about that a bit. Is there any color you want to add to that?
Like digging in and saying what really needs to be part of the product and how do you kind of get an idea for scope and like hard nitty-gritty
obviously
requirements.
Scope is going to precede budget, and if you're going to ink a deal with your company you found at a trade show, you're going to want to see a budget.
Yeah, that's right.
And a timeline.
So the best way one of the ways that I actually really love to figure out what technical requirements I need, and this is really only a modern era thing, you couldn't have done this even 5 to 7 years ago. I love to go out and look at what kind of SaaS and platform as a service options exist in the world and figure out what of those do have things that I like or need, and where do any of those fall short. And that is a really good way at getting at, okay, I need to have these kind of features and functions, and here's sort of what they need to do, and is looking at what exists in the world. In fact, I have a client who, when I first started working with them about 6 weeks ago, I was like, whew, this is like $750,000 worth of software we're talking about. And I was like, but let's do some research and let's get creative. And we're going to end up being able to put it together for about 50 grand because we've got 2 strategic partnerships with people who already do this stuff in the industry. And we're just bringing those 2 people together and leveraging the platforms they already have. So understanding what exists in the world and being able to be honest with yourself about your real competitors will go a long way to helping you design and put down on paper what your requirements really need to be.
Mhm.
Which will narrow your scope down, and it will help you get a better cost in the end, the more detailed you can be with that.
Not to mention reading negative reviews on sites like G2, where you can see for
Hey,
competitors what people aren't happy with.
that's
And then you can
exactly right.
also gain an understanding, because like I have a competitor that their software functionally does very similar things, but their go-to-market strategy and their target market is wildly different than mine is.
Yeah.
So we're obviously doing very different things. And by looking at G2 or sites like G2,
Yep.
you can see who is leaving the reviews. Then you can look up where they work, and then you can sort of back your way into, well, my
Yep.
competitor's target market is probably, enterprise in this case, where my
Yep.
target market is more SMB.
Yep. Totally. Totally. And one of the things I do when I design customer validation interviews is I always ask, are there things what are you doing to solve the problem today? What do you like about those solutions? What do you not like about them? Because sometimes the way that you compete with your competitors is to just do it better. Like it could be the same, but you do it better. And you'll gain 15-20% of their market just because you solved a problem that they haven't solved yet.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So in terms of the budget, because this is fraught with
The million
error as
dollar
well,
question.
especially when it comes to building software, because everything's more complicated than you think, everything takes longer than
Oh
you
yeah.
think.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
is it really feasible to come up with a budget, or do you then triple it when you're done? Because if you've got investors or you've got your beta customer, like we talked about a few minutes ago, and you wildly miss expectations, you might as well have just shot yourself in the head, because now they're going to be so unhappy that they're not going to want to continue.
Yeah. So the problem with the way people think about software development budgets is that they think about it as once the software is built, I'm done. You have to, yeah. It's sort of like thinking that once I build my house, I'm done. That's
Yeah,
not true.
never
Like
done.
they tell you to build in a certain percentage every year for maintenance items, and you know that in 10 years, all of that lovely travertine that you put in your house is going out of style. So you're probably going to
Mhm.
need to make a plan to have a renovation budget at some point. And probably before you sell, you need to make sure, like, there's lots of things over time that go into maintaining it. It's the same with software. Is it realistic to come up with an initial MVP budget that you can pretty much count on? Yeah, I would say you should always have about a 20% reserve, because just like when you're remodeling a house, if and even when you're building something new, when they start digging up the land or when they start digging into the requirements, whatever it is, they're going to find stuff that we're like, oh, we don't actually know how to solve that because we didn't foresee that problem. So
Mhm.
acting as if that wasn't preventable is part of the thing that gets people frustrated. Saying that I have 20% over my original budget set aside for things that may come up will help prevent that. And then realizing technology moves really fast. Servers are constantly being updated. APIs to products that you might be using are changing. The underlying security mechanisms of stuff that your
Mhm.
software is sitting on are changing. You have to be putting money into active development all along the way. How you decide whether you bring that in-house versus whether you continue to use like a contractor or something like that is just about the amount of time and energy you have to put in to upgrading features, adding new stuff, or maintaining your software. If it's less than 50 grand a year, it makes no sense to hire a person to do that work. Whereas if technology is the core of your business and that is the thing that creates the value, you should probably have a full-time team on staff working on that thing all the time, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the problem that people get into is thinking, one, uh, that they don't need a buffer. That's a mistake. You need to have a buffer. I say 20%. Depending, you should look at the track record of the partner that you're using, because if they can't show you their on-time record, if they can't show you their budget, over under record, it's probably not a great partner to work with, because they're either hiding something, or they just aren't tracking it, which means they aren't keeping an eye on being efficient and doing well
Mhm.
with your time and your money, right? And then the other mistake is thinking that once it's done, because that's just not the case. There's always things that have to be done, and there's always money that has to be spent. And so you need a budget for it. And what
So,
you have to budget depends on the project.
so let's talk a little bit about vetting a developer, because a buddy of mine is
Mm.
actually developing an app, and he literally had to start over because the
Ugh,
first firm, he hired a firm in India,
ouch.
and they were making great progress, and I was getting all these updates, and he's like, Trent, we're like 3 weeks from launch. And then I'm like, so what's going on? Like a month later, oh, they ghosted me. Like, I don't know where they are. I can't get a hold of them. I got to start all over again, which I can't even imagine. But
Oh man.
anyway, when
Yeah.
it comes to vetting developers, what are the must ask questions and the must
Mhm.
have proof of credibility that
Yeah.
you look for?
Yeah. I love offshore development teams when they are managed and trained and run by somebody I can sit in their office and look them in the face. So I have no problem with companies that I work with or developers that I work with using offshore teams. I don't want the offshore team being the one doing the management. And I'll tell you that there's a very good friend of mine here in Denver who runs a custom development shop. She uses all offshore developers, but she spent the last 6 years training these guys what American specs look like, and what, when somebody says these terms, what do they mean, and
Yeah.
working on refining that process with them. So what you're really looking for, like I said, is you want to see an on time, on budget record. Are they consistently 20% above their budget, but they're always on time? Well, that speaks to the 20% that I told you to block, right?
Yep.
Are they consistently on time and on budget? And how they're showing you that is, there are some people who keep a scorecard, and it's super brave and super vulnerable, and I love people like that. It's kind of rare too, because it takes being pretty honest about what you've really done with your projects. And mostly in business, we want to paint ourselves in the best light possible. So what's more important is to find the companies that have worked with the team, get their referrals, and then
Mhm.
do more digging to find the companies that they didn't refer to you and ask them what their experience was. Because a lot of times companies will work to prep those 3 referrals that they really love, because the other 25 companies they've worked with in the last year don't really have great things to say about them.
Yeah.
But you can find those companies if you do just a little bit of digging. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
so I think referrals are really important.
I actually had somebody do extreme vetting on me a while back before joining one of my programs. And I mean, he went back 10 years. He looked at the Wayback Machine. He looked at
Wow.
testimonials on sites that aren't even live anymore. He called and
Wow.
contacted a bunch of them, and he signed up because everybody said great things. They said, yeah,
Sure.
he's a great guy and he's going to do what he says he's going to do and so forth. But I actually may have a video now of him explaining how he vetted me to make sure that I was legit. So I echo your comments. If
That's
you're willing
awesome.
to do a little extra legwork, which maybe will take you an extra week, but could save you
Oh man.
hundreds of
Hundreds of
thousands of
thousands of
dollars.
dollars? Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, it's well
And
worth the time.
and beware your cousin who's an app developer. I like
No.
gut check,
Yeah.
when you're using friends and family versus when
Mhm.
it's actually worth spending the money and going legit. And also that also goes for your technical co-founder. If you are somebody who feels like having a tech co-founder, splitting your company because somebody gets your vision, do some digging into that person's background, because you know what you bring from a vision perspective, from a strategic thinking perspective, from a sales and marketing strategy perspective, whatever the other pieces are. You should understand just as well what all of that person's coworkers or other projects
Mhm.
they've worked on, how did those really go? Because you're giving up quite a bit of your company for a technical co-founder, sometimes as much as half.
Mhm. I did.
You're vetting them. I mean, you're vetting them. So you should do it as if they're a company that you're hiring and spending hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
dollars on.
In my case, I lived with him for years and we've been friends for 10 years. And I watched him start his first company and I watched him deal with a douchebag co-founder of that company. I was his roommate when I watched how he handled himself during that situation. I
Yep.
watched how he sold the company. I mean, there's
That's exactly
not much
right.
about this guy I don't know. And I would give him the keys to my bank account and not
That's
bat an eye at
exactly
him.
right.
But
That's exactly right.
that's not easy to find. I
No,
was
no.
exceedingly I wouldn't say lucky, but fortunate to be
Yes,
in that situation. I think most people are going to not have the benefit of,
that's
their
right.
having been roommates with their co-founder.
That's right. And there's sites out there like Founder Dating is one, which
Mhm.
sounds really good, right? Um, but again, you got to dig in with those people. I mean, it's a website that somebody can join or pay to join or whatever. So you got to be really diligent about who you bring in and why you're bringing them in, and do those gut checks. Like, trust your intuition about stuff.
So once development starts, so let's say, like we started here and the forecast is we're going to get to MVP at say month 12, just to make it
Yeah,
a nice,
yeah,
easy thing to talk about. At, and obviously the answer to this question is going to be subjective because it's going to change on a case by case basis. But
right.
if you have a rule of thumb
Hmm.
for when the marketing should start,
Yeah.
what would it look like?
So here's generally what I tell people. SEO is a long game. You need to start that I would like to see it 12 months before your launch. Now, there are some projects that are shorter time frame than that. You start that like day one. It's not super expensive, but it's really important, and it will help you kind of hone in on sort of more of the validation stuff we've already been talking about. Who are the people? What are they looking for? How are you solving their problem? So I always say start that. You can never start that too soon.
Mhm.
Social media, content strategy, generating blog posts, I say at least 6 months prior to launch, because you need to start establishing yourself as an expert in the field that you are addressing. How you do that is by putting out content. So I always point to, of the last 10 clients that I've landed, none of them came to me through online mechanisms. Every single one of them told me they hired me because of what I post on LinkedIn, what we post in our blogs, and all of our videos on YouTube. Every single one of those. I am established as an expert in the areas that I work with people on, and that's very clear based on not only the body of work that's out there, but the quality of the content that I'm putting out there. And that's really important. It's like you said to me off the air, Trent. You gotta write for people. You gotta talk to people. You gotta
Mhm.
be solving. If you're not solving a little bit of the problem every time you put out a blog post or every time you put out a video or a social media post, you're not doing it right, and you're not establishing yourself as an expert. So I always say, if you can start that stuff about 6 months prior to your launch to give yourself 6 months of a body of work to establish your expertise, that's about right. If you have the budget for PR, earned media, getting on news channels, getting written up by other bloggers, influencers, I like to start that 2 to 3 months prior to launch, because you want to build enough buzz, but you don't want to have to hold on to it for an extended period of time, because
Mhm.
people's brains are they lose track of
Oh
stuff real
yeah.
fast. 2 to 3 months is about right, because it means that the average person who you're trying to target will have heard your name associated with your message 2 or 3 times in that time period, so that when your launch happens, they're going to understand whether or not they need to be going there. And
Mhm.
that usually takes 2 or 3 months to get those couple of touch points and for people to remember it. And then I don't start doing online advertising or any kind of traditional advertising like Google AdWords or Facebook or LinkedIn advertising or TV or radio or anything like that until launch month. Because typically, if it's an ad situation and you're telling me to go somewhere or to click on an ad, I want to be able to buy right away. So all the other things are kind of establishing you in the market and getting people to know your name. That ad needs to be instant action. Now, the one time where I will say that I would potentially take out ads is if the development of my email list or my contact list relative to a product is really valuable to me. Then I might do some ads like in those 2 or 3 months where I'm doing marketing and PR, where people can click on a thing and the action they're taking is giving me their email address in like a lead generator. But usually, again, I won't start that more than 2 or 3 months out, because people want the thing.
Yeah.
Um, So that's how I usually recommend it. That's how I kind of set up when I set up pro formas for my entrepreneur clients. Usually that's how I set up their advertising and marketing spends and the timeframes and all that. So
Okay.
yeah.
So before we wrap up,
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about fundraising, because
Yes.
there is obviously, you got to get money to pay for your thing
That's
somehow.
right. That's
Earlier
right.
in our conversation, we talked about maybe getting your first customer to pay.
Yep.
In my case, I have other profitable businesses, so I'm able to bootstrap. Not everybody's able to do that.
That's right.
So there's lots of people who need to raise money.
Yeah.
Where, when, how, who? Walk us through it.
So again, this is one of those things where it can kind of like flex based on the
Yeah.
situation, right? But typically before revenue, if you're pre-revenue, really you've got friends and family and seed or angel investors. And where I love to look for people is investors that have already done work in my industry or other business owners in the industry that I'm targeting who might want to partner or invest in order to get a better deal or get early access or solve the problem for their customers or their business or whatever earlier. When you're pre-revenue, it's the time when you have to get the most creative. It's really easy for a venture capitalist or even an angel investor to look at a company that's generating revenue and say, how do I think this is on an upward trend? Do I think that this is going to hit, these arbitrary metrics that I've set for myself? Because it's all based on revenue. When you're pre-revenue, you have to get a lot more creative. There are people who will invest in companies like that. I see it every day. Generally, they need to have a really good understanding of your industry, or they need to have some kind of a belief or investment in you as a person. And if you can find somebody who has both of those things, you're golden, and you can probably get everything you need out of one person.
Mm-hmm. And that is what actually happened for me with my very first company. The investor was someone who I actually used to manage his money in my prior career.
See, there you go.
And luckily for me, the very first investment I made for him, he did very well. So I was the golden child after
That's
that, even
right.
though the other subsequent investments were
We're
just
like,
like
eh.
average base hits, first impressions being what they are. And that was 30 years ago. And I'm still friends with this man to this day.
I love to hear that story. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With respect to raising money from strangers in the event that you didn't have somebody like I had,
Right.
I call him my rich dad.
Yep.
Do you need a business plan or a pitch deck these days, or both?
The purpose of the business plan now, no, but I have not in probably at least 2 or 3 years had an investor ask me for a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
They've asked me, did I do the work of a business plan? And usually that comes out in creating your pitch deck and how specific you are and how well you know your market. The purpose of doing the business plan is to dig into all the areas you have to be able to speak to in order to sound intelligent and in order for an investor to take you seriously. They don't need to see it. They don't want to see it. What they want to see is that you know it and they want to see your pitch deck. And I usually encourage people to have two different kinds of pitch decks. One is the kind that you are doing a live pitch and it's a slide deck that's in conjunction with your speaking about what you're doing. The other is a send away. The send away
Yeah.
can be a
Send me
little
your
bit
deck.
more, exactly. That one can be a little bit more wordy, but I would still err on the side of the more you can do, the more you can communicate what you're doing with graphics, with short, concise phrases, not even entire sentences, and somebody can get it right away. As an investor, that tells me you understand really well what you're doing, and I also understand what you're doing, and I didn't have to spend the 6 months that you did doing all of your research.
Yeah.
So it's really, really key to not get too verbose. And it's easier to do that with the live pitch deck because you're talking about it in the moment. But I have seen some really good send away pitch decks that have very few words and there's no big long sentences and tiny type. Stay away from that. If you've done that, you've done it wrong.
Well, luckily, there's this thing called the internet, and it's filled with pitch decks of companies that have already raised millions and millions of
You
dollars, and you
got
can go
it.
look at their pitch decks. So you do
You
not
got
have to
it.
start from scratch.
And beware that just because a company raised millions of dollars doesn't mean they had a good pitch deck.
No. No,
So
might have been they
buyer
had a key
beware.
relationship, or they had a groundbreaking idea, or they had a founder who had a track record already, and
Yep.
he could have raised money simply by saying, "I'm doing another deal. Are you in?"
And everybody was like, yep, how much do you need this time? Here
Exactly.
you go. That's right.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk about this. I do hope that we have delivered value to the audience. If at a minimum, we have helped at least one person avoid blowing 300 grand, lose 6 months of their life, losing their house and their wife and every other thing under the sun. Mission accomplished. For people who would like to continue this conversation with you, what
Yes.
is the one easiest way? Don't give me 6, just one that you would like them to get in touch, to reach out to you.
RaikaTech.com, RaikaTech.com. Everything, all of our social media profiles, our blogs, all that stuff's linked to you from there. You go there, you'll be able to get me and anything else that you need.
All right, let me make sure I've got that in the show notes. Rattle that off one more time so I can put it into the show notes.
Yep, RaikaTech.com.
RaikaTech.com. There we go,
Yep.
folks. So if you've been driving, don't try and write that down. It'll be in the show notes. I don't know the episode number yet, but I will set it in the beginning and at the end in post-production. So you'll be able to get there and find the link. All right, Cynthia, thank you so much for making some time to be on the show. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our talk, and I dig your show, man. You talk to some cool people.